Royal court casts out defiant Princess Human finds her dying alone in the void. The fog was alive that night. It curled in slow, deliberate coils around the outpost's gantries, slithering across rusted metal like some ancient predator tasting. The air, it carried the tongue of acid and corroded steel, the breath of a moon that did not want him here. For 5 years, Asher had learned its moods, its subtle shifts in density, the way it thinned before a storm, or thickened when the wind died. In all that time, nothing had disturbed its rhythm until now. The bioscanner on his workbench screamed, a frantic, high-pitched alarm that jolted him upright. The old unit was calibrated to ignore Vale's fungal mats, tuned only for complex vertebrate signatures. He stared at the screen. The signal was close, too close, and fading fast. He should have ignored it. The rule had kept him alive. No contact. No survivors. No strays. The moment you let something in, you opened the door to the ghosts. But the pulse on the display was a siren song, and the medic inside him, the one he had buried beneath layers of solitude and soil, was already moving. He sealed the outer layer of his environment suit, the hiss of the pumps, a familiar grounding. Sound. Medkit in one hand, heavy torch in the other, he cycled through the airlock. The fog swallowed him instantly, turning the beam into a hazy sphere of light no bigger than an arm's reach. He navigated by memory, his wrist display ticking off meters toward the source. The perimeter fence loomed, skeletal in the dim glow. Beyond it lay a shallow crater, a place where the fog's toxicity pooled like stagnant water. The scanners. Tone became a rapid, desperate chirp. He found her there. She was a smear of impossible color in a world of gray-skin the deep. Wet crimson of fresh blood, hair a tangle of scarlet, shot through with metallic strands. Her uniform, if it could be called that, was in tatters, woven with threads that caught the faint light like captured stars. One arm lay twisted at an angle no joint should endure. Across her abdomen, a long, ragged gash oozed a fluid the color of midnight. Pointed ears flattened against her skull, a feline posture of pain. Asher knew the look from war footage. The Valyrian, proud, unyielding, enemies once. And dying. The rule broke with the sound of his own grunt as he bent and lifted her. She was heavier than she looked, all muscle under that alien grace, yet she felt fragile in his arms. The journey back was a blur of straining legs and the soft ping of her life signs weakening with every step. Inside, the decontamination lights burned white against the fog stain on their suits. He stripped his gear and carried her to the cot, his cot the only bed in the habitat. The recycled air filled with her scent, sharp iron from blood and something faintly floral beneath. He worked quickly, cutting away fabric, hands steady even as his chest tightened. What he found was worse than the wound. Her skin around it was modeling, the cellular structure breaking down in fractal patterns that spread with every passing second. It wasn't just the injury. The moon itself was killing her. The data in. His mind shuffled into place Valyrian physiology, atmospheric composition, the peculiar leptin radiation unique to Vale. Harmless to him. Fatal to her. There was no antidote, but maybe a counteragent. His gaze went to the sealed case in the hydroponics bay, to the soft green glow of Vale's phosphorescent moss. A miracle organism that consumed radiation and exhaled harmless. Light dot, he ground the samples, isolating the compound with the precision of a field surgeon. Hours passed in a blur until a bowl of thick, luminescent paste pulsed gently in his hands. A long shot. Maybe their only shot. She woke as he approached. Golden eyes snapping open, molten with fury even through the pain. She moved a sudden, coiled lunge. He sidestepped, letting her collapse under her own failing strength. "You need to be still," he said evenly, holding the glowing bowl. "I will not be tended by a lesser species she hissed, voice ragged, but still edged like a blade. No, he replied, kneeling not in deference, but in the posture of a medic at work. Your pride is killing you. This moon is unrighting your cells. I made something that might stop it. Her grip closed on his wrist, strong despite the tremor. They locked eyes, a silent battle of wills. Slowly, her fingers eased. He took it as consent. The paste was cool against his fingertips, slick as river. Mud. When it touched her wound, she shuddered, a full-body tremor. Her breath caught, but the fever heat in her skin eased. For the first time since she'd fallen into his world, she looked at him without outright contempt-only suspicion, and beneath it, something else. Something neither of them would name. Not yet. The habitat settled into an uneasy rhythm. Outside, the fog pressed at the dome like a living thing, its gray coils writhing against the transparent barrier. Inside, two exiles circled each other in a space barely large enough for one. Asher worked with quiet precision, tending his plants, recalibrating the sensor array, preparing the moss salve every few hours. Valora lay on the cot, her posture rigid. Even in exhaustion, every movement betraying the strain of holding her pride like a shield. When he approached with the paste, she tensed as if bracing for battle. The application was clinical, but the intimacy of it was inescapable. His fingers brushed her skin, tracing the edges of the gash, spreading the glowing green compound. Each time, her jaw tightened, golden eyes fixed somewhere over his shoulder, as though ignoring him might restore the dignity her body had stolen from her. The first time he offered food, she turned her head away. This is sustenance for beasts, she rasped. It's what I have, he said simply, holding the spoon steady. If you want to heal, you need fuel. Her lips pressed into a line, but after a long moment, she took it each bite like swallowing her own resentment. Days blurred into cycles. The salve slowed the decay, knitting alien tissue with improbable efficiency. She began to watch him in the spaces between treatments. She noticed the way he moved through the habitat at place, clearly built by his own hands, each tool in its place, each system running with quiet efficiency. She saw him in the hydroponics bay, tending rows of green like they were something sacred. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was measured, almost gentle. There was no awe in his eyes when they met hers, no deference to her station, only the assessing calm of a man who saw her as a patient, not a princess. Her own story came out in fragments. In the stillness between cycles, she told him of the palace, marble halls, ceremonial armor, the endless suffocating theater of court. How she had refused a political bonding to Lord Zeron, a warrior known for his cruelty. How her defiance had been met not with exile to some quiet moon, but with an unspoken death sentence left here for Vale to finish. You should have let me die, she said once, her voice low, eyes fixed on the wall. He didn't look up from grinding the moss. Maybe, but I didn't. The quiet truce shattered with a sudden, metallic shriek from the panel. A warning klaxon blared, the habitat's lights shifting to red. Asher was across the room in 2 strides, fingers flying. Over controls. The external cameras flickered on, showing only swirling fog until something darker sliced through it. A shape hovered 20 meters out, sleeked in black, its surface rippling like oiled metal. A Catherine probe, hunting bird in design, a single. Red optical sensor glowing like an unblinking eye. It hung there, scanning, Valorous face drained of color. They've found me. They've found the habitat, Asher corrected, his voice turning flat. Efficient. The probe darted skyward, vanishing into the fog with predatory grace. Silence fell heavier than the alarm. Asher began pulling gear from hidden compartments, compact packs, sealed canisters, a weather scanner. He moved with a speed that spoke of rehearsed escape plans. We go now, he said, The canyons will mask us from their sensors. Valora swung her legs off the cot, still unsteady but fierce. The way she looked at him was different, now not just as her reluctant healer, but as the only ally she had left. She didn't ask if he had a plan. She could see it in his eyes. He'd had one all along. The fog thickened as they left the dome behind, swallowing the last glow of the habitat until it was just another shadow in the endless gray. Every step was a muted thud on the damp metal grating that ringed the outpost, and a hollow clank as they crossed the gate and stepped onto Vale's raw terrain. The air felt heavier out here, saturated with the moon's corrosive humidity. Asher moved with a strange, unhurried confidence, his visor's dim glow revealing little more than the next patch of ground. He didn't waste words, only glanced at his wrist display now and then, adjusting their course with subtle shifts. Behind him, Alora followed, her gait careful but growing steadier with each step. Her senses strained for movement in the murk, ears twitching at the drip of condensation and the faint hiss of wind through rock fissures. Somewhere behind them, out in the unseen void, she imagined the assassins moving silent predators with orders to bring her head back to Zaran. They crossed a shallow stream, its sluggish water a dark mirror under the light of their torches. Asher waded through without pause, deliberately crushing pale fungi underfoot. A pungent, almost sweet scent filled the air. "What is that?" she asked, the rebreather in her helmet muffling her voice. "Camouflage," he replied. "The spores will mask our thermal signatures for a few hours." They pressed on, deeper into a maze of jagged canyons. The walls rose high and close, their surfaces slick with moss and strange pale vines that glowed faintly like veins under skin. Here, the fog clung in slow eddies, thicker at the base, thinning just enough above to give a sense of the towering rock. Asher stopped once to scan the air currents, adjusting their route with a faint grunt of satisfaction. Valora watched him, curiosity gnawing at her usual reserve. He was no soldier. His stance lacked the predatory forward lean of a fighter, but he moved like a man who understood this environment down to its bones. When they made camp in a narrow rock alcove, he unpacked a compact heat unit, its glow shielded by a collapsible shroud. She noticed the deliberate care with which he placed every piece, as though even the act of boiling water was part of some greater strategy. In the faint light, she stepped toward him. "You have the bearing of a man who knows battle, yet you carry no warrior's pride." He glanced up at her, a faint smirk touching his mouth. "Battle's not always about killing. Sometimes it's about outlasting." She considered that, the words feeling heavier than they should. Then, in a gesture so uncharacteristic it startled them both, she crouched beside him and reached for the survival rations. "Show me how to prepare them," she said. For the next hour, they worked side by side in silence broken only by the hiss of the small stove and the occasional clink of metal. The tension between them had shifted less brittle, more like the slow weaving of an unspoken pact. Later, when they moved on, Valora studied his back as he led them through a tight rock cleft. She had thought herself the stronger, the one carrying the other through danger. But in the alien hush of the canyon, she understood out here, his strength was the one that mattered. And if they were to survive, she would have to trust it. The spores drifted like ghostly lanterns in the fog, beautiful, in a way that only the most lethal things could be. They hung in the air in delicate spirals, catching the pale green glow from the moss, turning the whole basin into a dreamscape. The assassins slowed, their visors recalibrating, scanning the unfamiliar particles. One tilted his head, the motion, almost curious. Then came the first ragged gasp over their comms. The second stumbled a half step, plasma rifle dipping as a warning klaxon blared from inside his armor. Valora saw it instantly, the hesitation, the confusion, and pressed forward, her movements liquid and lethal. She darted between their staggered shots, each one burning a molten scar into the rock, but never touching her. The spores were working faster now, clinging to their armor seals, seeping into filters designed for combat, not alien biology. On the ridge above, Asher kept his eyes locked on the wind currents, shifting his weight, ready to trigger the next set of charges if the breeze threatened to thin the haze too quickly. His pulse was steady, his breathing even. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but in this moment, the discipline was still there, measured, deliberate, absolute. One assassin went to a knee, gauntlets clawing at his helmet. A thin hiss of smoke curled from the seals at his neck before he collapsed completely, body jerking in the throes of neural shutdown. The second tried to back away, his movements erratic, firing wildly into the fog. Valora closed the distance. In 3 strides, the Vero blade hummed in her grip as she struck low, severing the rifle's barrel before pivoting and slamming the hilt into his visor. The assassin dropped, writhing, breath rasping through failing filters. The air shifted again, not from wind, but from something heavier, deeper. A new vibration rolled through the canyon, a bass hum that vibrated in Asher's teeth. Then the fog tore open above them, pushed aside by the downdraft of descending thrusters. The shuttle that emerged was a thing of black, gleaming menace Valyrian design, all angular armor plating and predatory curves. It landed with the precision of a blade sliding into its sheath. The ramp hissed down, and a massive figure stepped into the poisoned basin. His armor gleamed despite the spores, its plating layered and ornate, every line built to intimidate. His voice, amplified by the helmet, rolled across the stone like a war drum. "Daughter of Valyrian," he declared, "you have led my hunters a merry chase, but it ends now. You will die in this filth, forgotten. Your defiance will mean nothing." Valora's grip on the Vero blade tightened. "Zaran," she said, the name like venom. Asher, still on the ridge, saw the danger immediately. Zaren's armor was sealed tight, newer, stronger. The spores wouldn't touch him fast enough. He met Valora's eyes across the basin, a silent question. She gave him the barest nod. Asher moved along the ridge, planting the last charges into the densest clusters of Reaper's breath. Zaran advanced on Valora, mace in hand, each step thudding into the rock like a war drum. The detonator in Asher's palm was suddenly heavy. He pressed it. The canyon cracked with the sound of splitting stone, and a second wave of spores billowed out, thicker, hotter, the air turning into a golden storm. Even Zaran hesitated as the haze wrapped around him. The faintest sizzle began. At the seams of his gauntlet, Valora surged forward, immune thanks to Asher's cure, her blade a ribbon of light in the swirling gold. She ducked under the sweep of the mace, came up inside his guard, and drove the Vero blade against the armor's weakest joint. Metal screamed. Zaran roared, stumbling, and for the first time she saw fear in his stance. She pressed, blow after. Precise blow, until the great lord of a dozen conquered systems was on his knees, gasping through failing filters. The basin fell silent, except for the faint hiss of decaying armor. The assassins lay broken. Zaran bound with his own restraints, the spores settling back into the stone like nothing had happened. When Asher climbed down from the ridge, his face was smeared with rock dust, his eyes bright and sharp. Valora stood over her enemy, her chest heaving, and looked at him not as a healer or a stranger, but as an equal who had just fought beside her, and the chasm between them felt smaller than it ever had. The shuttle's interior was cold and sharp-edged, every surface a study in Valyrian precision. Even with Zaran locked in the brig, and the assassins slumped unconscious beside him, the air still hummed with danger. Valora moved through the corridors, with the instinctive grace of someone born to command ships like this. Asher followed, eyes scanning every control panel, every readout, absorbing unfamiliar systems as if mapping the vessel into his mind. On the bridge, the view screen painted, the black with a scatter of distant stars. Valora slid into the command chair, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. She brought up the ship's logs, and there they were, Aron's uncoded transmissions. Every treasonous order and plotted coup lay bare. The evidence was damning enough to ruin him, perhaps topple others with him. She sat back, the glow from the console etching hard lines into her face. "With this," she said, "my name is cleared. My father will have no choice but to restore me." Asher's gaze lingered on the display, then on her. "And me?" The words landed heavier than he'd intended, but they hung there between. "Them?" She turned, reading his expression like a battlefield measuring the set of his jaw, the cool steadiness of his eyes. "You would be honored," she said at last. "The Empire could grant you a title, a place." He shook his head slowly. "A place," he echoed, "not a life." Her lips parted to reply, but the ship's autopilot chimed, a gentle reminder that their course was still set for the Imperium's Central Sector. The thought of returning to the marble halls, to the endless ceremonies and the heavy weight of 1,000 years of Valyrian politics, suddenly felt like walking back into a gilded cage. She glanced sideways at Asher, the man who had pulled her from death and fog and shown her a life built of soil, light, and quiet mornings. They didn't speak again until hours later, when the shuttle slipped into a lonely stretch of untraveled space. It was there that the question neither wanted to voice finally broke free. "What if we didn't go back?" Asher asked, his tone careful, almost casual, but his eyes searched hers. Valyora's answer didn't come quickly. She thought of her father's face, of the Empire's pride, of the home she'd been raised to believe was her only destiny. Then she thought of the cold nights on Vale's surface, of the warmth of his arms when the frost storms closed in, of the first moment she'd woken to the sound of his voice instead of the emptiness of exile. The silence between them stretched, not awkward but taut with the weight of the choice. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but certain. "Plot a course away from the Imperium, somewhere they will never think to look." His eyes didn't leave hers as he reached for the navigation controls. "You're sure?" Her hand covered his on the console, fingers sliding between his. "I'm sure." The ship's engines rumbled beneath them as new coordinates locked in a distant, uncharted nebula blooming in the holographic display like a storm of gold and violet. They stood together as the stars outside began to stretch, the black between them falling away. Valora looked forward, but her grip on his hand tightened. "This is our life now," she said, and for the first time in years, she felt the truth of her own words settle into her bones. And Asher, who had thought himself a ghost wandering the edges of the galaxy, finally let himself believe in the possibility of home. The nebula rose before them like a living tapestry, gold and violet clouds folding into one another, streaked with the faint lightning of ion storms. 3 years had passed since they had first turned their backs on the Valyrian Imperium, and Huron, a small turquoise jewel of a planet they named Sanctuary. They had carved out a life that belonged to no one but themselves. Their home was built into the slope of a green valley overlooking the sea. The structure was a fusion of alien elegance and human pragmatism grown from the crystalline framework of Zaren's shuttle, softened with stone and timber cut from the silver-barked trees. Terraces of rich soil spilled down toward the water, thick with vegetables from Asher's Terran seed bank and edible native flora. Valora had learned to harvest with patient hands. In the cool dawn, she trained in the courtyard, her crimson skin glistening with sweat, hair whipping like a banner as she moved through the deadly arcs of her warriors' forms. Asher would watch from the terrace, a mug of bitter roasted tan coffee warming his hands. Knowing every movement in that dance was a conversation with who she used to be and who she had chosen to become. When the sun was high, the roles would reverse. He would draw her into the hydroponics bay, guiding her hands as she pruned stubborn tomato plants. "They're not soldiers," he'd remind her with quiet amusement. "They don't obey orders, they respond to care." She would huff at that, but her fingers would slow, gentle, coaxing the stems into place that they explored their world together, mapping rivers that glowed at night with bioluminescent algae, cataloging the songs of glass-leaved trees when the wind passed through them. It was a rhythm of creation and discovery, of shared meals and long silences that needed no words. God, it might have stayed that way forever, if not for the faint, coded ping that arrived one late afternoon, carried on a comms array they rarely powered. A message, encrypted in old imperial cipher, took 2 days to crack. When the screen finally resolved into words, Valora read them in silence. A full pardon, her name restored. An invitation to return not just for her, but for him. Her father, though bound by honor, would welcome her back. The Imperium needed her. For days the message lay between them like a blade, sharp enough to cut but untouched. They moved carefully, their conversations skimming the surface. At night, Valora would stand on the terrace, eyes searching the sky, as if she could see the marble spires of home through the stars. Asher spent more time in the fields, his hands buried in the earth, like he could anchor himself here by touch alone. It ended in the training yard at dusk, the moons rising in silver arcs above them. She wasn't in her training gear, just her. Plain working clothes, but she carried 2 blunted blades. She tossed one to him. "I can't think," she said simply. They fought the way they spoke when words failed fast. Fierce, each strike a confession, each block an answer. Sweat slicked their skin, breaths coming hard. At last he caught her from behind, arm across her chest, blade poised at her heart. His voice was a whisper against her ear. "Your home is here, or in the palace that cast you aside. Which is it?" Her. Blade fell from her hand, clattering to the stone. "You," she murmured, "always you." That night, on the bridge of the shuttle, she composed the reply. 3 words in the old tongue. "We are at peace." She added a single private line for her father, an old lullaby verse, and sent it into the void, then powered down the array for good. The seasons turned. The silver-barked trees shed their chiming leaves, and new life pushed up through rich soil. One evening, as the violet sun slid toward the sea, Valora took Asher's hand and pressed it to her abdomen. Beneath her skin, he felt the faint, rhythmic flutter of a new heartbeat. She said nothing, but he saw it in her golden eyes, his child, their child, neither human nor Valyrian, born of survival, defiance, and love. The man who had once been a ghost closed his eyes and pressed his forehead to her stomach, feeling not the absence of what he'd lost, but the fierce, undeniable presence of what they had built. Together, they had taken the shattered pieces of 2 broken lives and made something whole. Not just a home, not just survival, a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, life would not merely endure, it would thrive.